Euphoria was supposed to be one of the defining TV shows of its generation. Critics praised it, audience obsessed over it, and for a while it felt like HBO had found its next cultural phenomenon. Yet somehow, after 3 seasons, one of HBO's biggest shows went from groundbreaking to completely off the rails. And I left thinking to myself how a show that started with so much promise ended up becoming such a mess. Because the biggest problem with Euphoria isn't that it just got worse over time, it's that the qualities that made season 1 work were slowly replaced by everything that eventually broke the show. What began as a raw story about addiction and self-destruction evolved into something completely different. Something that didn't just ruin the show but completely broke the foundation entirely. So in this video, we're retracing Euphoria's entire journey, from its strongest moments to its most frustrating decisions, to figure out exactly where it all went wrong and why its ending feels like the perfect example of modern prestige television. So strap in and enjoy. Going back and rewatching Euphoria Season 1, man, it's a jarring experience and not for the reasons people usually talk about. This is the version of Euphoria that almost feels forgotten. Before the controversy, before the constant discourse, this was a deeply personal story. Sam Levinson wasn't just trying to shock audiences, he was pulling directly from his own struggles and translating that into something raw and unfiltered. And that authenticity is exactly what made the first season hit so hard. At the center of it all is Zendaya's Rue Bennett, a high school girl dealing with addiction. Not some glamorized take, this is messy, uncomfortable, and deeply hard to watch. Rue's anxiety is so overwhelming that even something as basic as breathing can spiral into a panic attack. And because she narrates the story, you're not just watching her, you're stuck in her head. That narration could have easily been annoying, but here it works because it turns Rue into an audience surrogate, guiding us through every bad decision and every fleeting moment of clarity. There's a scene early in the season that perfectly defines her character. Rue tries to think of a single happy memory from her summer, and she can't. Not one. The only thing she can come up with is a small moment with her sister. It's a simple scene, sure, but it tells you everything about her mental state. This is someone who genuinely doesn't see joy in her life, which makes everything that follows feel inevitable. But the moment Rue meets Jules Vaughn, played by Hunter Schafer, the entire tone of the show shifts. Jules isn't just another character, she's the emotional core. Where Rue is self-destructive and stuck, Jules is expressive and searching for identity in a completely different way. Their relationship becomes the backbone of season 1. It's in those quieter, more intimate scenes like their early sleepover, where the show feels the most real. You can actually believe that they need each other, even if that dependency isn't exactly healthy.
And maybe Ellie was right about Jules, because this doesn't feel good.
Outside of Rue and Jules, the supporting cast builds out this world in interesting, if sometimes uneven ways. Cassie Howard in season 1 feels like a real person, someone constantly pulled into a toxic relationship despite wanting something better. Like, I totally forgot about the abortion plot and how devastating it can be. Her storyline is grounded in insecurities and the need for validation, which makes her arc relatable even when it's frustrating. Then you've got Nate Jacobs, who is easily one of the most disturbing and complex characters in the series. On the surface, he's the stereotypical high school jock, but underneath that is someone deeply controlling, angry, and obsessed with power. Whether it's his manipulation of Jules or his violent outbursts, everything about him is extreme. But what makes him compelling is that his behavior feels rooted in something real. His ambition, his upbringing, and his need to dominate every situation he's in. And then there's Fezco, played by the late Angus Cloud, who slowly becomes one of the most important characters of the show. At first, he seems like your typical drug dealer, but as the season progresses, you realize he's actually one of the few characters with a moral compass. He's loyal, protective, and surprisingly compassionate, especially in his scenes with Rue. When he refuses to give her drugs, it comes from a place of care, not judgment. That balance makes him one of the most grounded characters in the show. On a technical level, Euphoria is operating at an insane level. The music done by Labrinth is a huge part of what gives the show its identity. It's dark, atmospheric, and almost hypnotic at times, perfectly matching the tone of the story. Visually, this is one of the best looking shows HBO has ever produced. The lighting, the camera work, the color grading, it all combines to create something that feels like a long-form film rather than a traditional TV show. Even if you don't connect with the story, The visuals will definitely hook you in. But as strong as season 1 is, this is where the cracks start to show. Because while the show begins as a grounded character study, it slowly leans more into style over substance. Certain subplots, especially ones meant to explore empowerment or identity, don't fully land and instead feel underdeveloped or overly exaggerated. The balance between realism and shock value starts to slip, and not every character gets the depth they probably needed. There are also moments where the structure feels inconsistent. The character focus openings are a great idea and add a lot of context, but once the episodes move forward, the narrative can feel scattered, like it's jumping from one moment to the next without always trying to piece everything together. At times, it genuinely feels like an extended music video rather than a tightly written story. But here's something most people seem to forget about Euphoria. It was complete. Sam Levinson mentioned how they treat every season like a final season, and that method was used best here. The characters have come a long way since the start of the season. If the show ended here, we would look back at the show as a flawed but ultimately brilliant piece of television. But as we know, HBO doesn't care about a logical end. They care about keeping the hype train going for more views over the quality of the story. At the end of the day, it's hard to sit here and call Euphoria Season 1 bad, because it's not. In fact, it's arguably the show at its best. It's emotional, visually stunning, and driven by characters that, at least at this stage, feel real and layered. Sure, the signs of the future problems are already there, especially with how the show handles its more graphic elements, but the core of what made Euphoria special is still intact here. So when you really break it down, this first season of Euphoria is a flawed but self-contained and powerful start. It's not perfect, but it delivers what matters most: characters, themes, and atmosphere. And compared to what's gonna come later, this feels like Euphoria firing on all cylinders. So I'm gonna give season 1 an 8 out of 10. Before we continue with the rest of the video, if you're the kind of person who actually wants to understand why a movie or TV show works, not just whether it's good or bad, you're in the right place. So make sure to subscribe to the channel. That's exactly what we do here every single week. Okay, let's talk about Euphoria Season 2. Season 2 of Euphoria is the exact moment we realized we were in a toxic relationship with this show.
Oh no!
Not the full downfall, that comes later. But this is the crack in the armor, the warning sign, the point where you start to question if the show you still loved is still there. This is the Game of Thrones Season 7 of Euphoria, a season that clearly shows the decay even if the collapse isn't complete yet. Now, I want to be fair here, Season 2 isn't the worst thing ever made. There are genuinely great moments here. Episode 1 alone is masterful. Fezco's backstory adds a lot of depth to the show that it desperately needed. Seeing how he was raised, how he was forced into that life, and how he became who he is. It grounds the show emotionally, it gives it heart. And knowing how things end for him, it makes it hit even harder. The atmosphere is also still incredible. The party in episode 1 is one of the best directed sequences in the entire show. The lighting, the use of film, the tension, it's all breathtaking. Nate Jacobs scanning the room, Rue and Jules reconnecting, everything feels alive. This is Euphoria at its peak. The music continues to carry as well. Labrinth once again delivers amazing music, and the I'm Tired performance is one of the most powerful scenes in the show. It's emotional, surreal, and actually feels like it has something to say about Rue's mental state. For a brief moment, the show actually feels focused, like it knows what it wants to be. And of course, Zendaya is incredible. There's a reason she won an Emmy for this season. Episode 5 is intense, uncomfortable, and borderline exhausting in the best possible way. You can watch Rue completely spiral, burning every bridge, destroying every relationship, and it feels real. Sure, the police chase is very goofy, but as a whole, it feels earned. This is the one storyline that actually has consequences, and because of that, it stands out above everything else. There are also solid performances across the board. Lexi becomes a standout, with her play offering a unique perspective on the characters. Maud Apatow is really an unnoticed hero here and gives Lexi a stronger presence. Her connection with Fezco is one of the few relationships that actually feels natural. Sydney Sweeney also dives deeper into Cassie's character. Her storyline shows someone desperately seeking validation, especially through Nate. It's the small details, like her spending hours getting ready, highlighting how broken she really is. The "I have never been happier" line,
I have never, ever been happier!
is a line that shows how unsettling she is with everything happening. And when the show leans into the drama, she delivers. The problem is the writing doesn't always support that performance, because once you get past those highs, everything falls apart. The biggest issue with Euphoria Season 2 is its complete lack of structure and consistent conflict. The show sets up major storylines and then either rushes through them or abandons them entirely. There is no sense of progression, no real build-up, just moments. Take Rue and Jules. Their conflict should have been the emotional backbone of the season. It's set up perfectly in the first episode. There's tension, there's history, there's something to explore. But because the show is written like a kid with crayons in his nose, it gets resolved almost immediately. The stakes are gone before they even get a chance to matter. Even Nate and Fezco, this was one of the most anticipated conflicts going into season 2. The show builds it up perfectly, teases it, and then nothing. A confrontation happens, but there are barely any consequences. It feels like the show is afraid to commit to its own storylines. And this happens constantly. Big moments with no real follow-up, important events with no payoff. The show creates tension and then immediately drops it, replacing it with something else that goes nowhere. Nate's character is a perfect example of this problem. He makes huge, sometimes insane decisions, like threatening Maddie with a gun, but the show treats it like it's not a big deal. These moments should have massive consequences, but instead they feel like random and ultimately pointless. The same goes for Nate and Cassie's relationship. It feels forced from the start. There's no real build-up, no proper development, just sudden insanity. And while the actors do their best, the writing makes it hard to believe in what's happening. It ends up feeling like drama for the sake of drama. Jules also suffers heavily this season. The complexity that made her compelling in season 1 is mostly gone. Her decisions feel inconsistent and her role in the story becomes frustrating rather than engaging. Instead of evolving, her character feels like she's moving backwards. New additions like Elliot don't add much. He creates tension, sure, but there's no real depth to him. He exists to complicate things, not to enhance the story. He has zero reason to be here. You could remove him from the story and nothing would change. He is just an annoying third wheel with no real meaning to this story. Then there is the pacing and editing, which is all over the place. Scenes start and end abruptly. Important moments happen off screen, and character interactions feel incomplete. There are entire conflicts that get skipped over, like Maddie and Cassie's fight at the play, making the story feel disjointed. It's like key pieces of the narrative are missing. You can also feel the production issues behind the scenes. It's clear the pandemic hurt portions of the season. Certain characters get sidelined or reduced entirely. Kat, who was once a major part of the show, barely has anything to do. You can feel the performance there, but the writing gives her nothing to do. McKay appears in the first episode, then vanishes, leaving no trace or impact whatsoever. These aren't minor characters, they were important before, but now they feel irrelevant. All of this points back to the core issue. The writing. Sam Levinson becomes so focused on the aesthetic, the vibe, the shock value, that the actual storytelling suffers. I can't even show you clips to understand my point because either nothing happens or this video will be taken down. The show looks incredible. It might be one of the best looking shows on TV, but it doesn't know how to structure a narrative anymore. It's all style over substance in the worst way. And that leads us to the finale. For a show this big with this many characters and storylines, the finale should feel like the epic payoff. Instead, it feels empty. There's no resolution, no satisfying conclusions, and no sense that anything we watch actually mattered. It's not like the worst finale ever made, but it is one of the most forgettable ones. Ultimately, Euphoria Season 2 isn't terrible. There are moments of brilliance scattered throughout. Incredible performances, standout episodes, and some genuinely powerful scenes. But as a complete season, it's inconsistent, unfocused, and frustrating. This is where the downfall begins, where the show starts prioritizing style over storytelling, where the cracks become impossible to ignore, and once you see those cracks, it's hard to notice how quickly everything else falls apart. So, I'm gonna give season 2 a 4 out of 10. So now we get to the real garbage. The real reason I wanted to make this video. See, the other 2 seasons are like, whatever, they're fine. But this one is straight up dog shit. This is the exact moment where the show really collapses. Not just a bad season, but the point where Euphoria stops feeling like the series people fell in love with and started feeling like something else entirely. Every core strength from season 1, gone. In its place comes in a lot of shock value, inconsistent writing, and a narrative that feels like it's actively working against itself. The opening alone sets everything up. Rue immediately spirals into a chaotic sequence involving a car driving over a fence. And instead of establishing stakes or direction, it plays more like a Looney Tunes cartoon. It's the kind of moment that looks intense on a clip, but falls apart the second you try to connect the dots. And that's the pattern the season repeats. Big, stylized moments that don't actually build towards anything. Now, I'm gonna be nice for a moment and say one big strength of the season, Zendaya. Even when the writing around Rue Bennett is scattered and annoying to watch, she's still giving all the effort in the world. She carries every good or bad moment on her back. Like, she is way too good for this show. But the problem is that the show doesn't know what to do with her anymore. The time jump fractures her character arc, and instead of evolving naturally, she feels like reset into a version of the character that exists only to serve plot mechanics. Her relapse into drug-related chaos, including being pulled back to a massive debt introduced earlier in season 2, feels less like regression and more like recycling conflicts because the story has nowhere else to go. That same identity crisis hits almost every major character. Cassie Howard is pushed into an exaggerated OnlyFans storyline that leans so heavily on shock it forgets to build emotional weight around it. It's not that the idea doesn't make sense, because it kinda does for her character. It's just that the show treats it like spectacle instead of character development. And it sucks because despite what the internet may say, Sydney Sweeney is a great actress. It's just that the writing reduces Cassie to a series of increasingly loud decisions rather than a believable arc. Then there's Nate Jacobs, who might be the clearest example of the show losing its reality. His motivations shift constantly. One moment's controlling, the next oddly restrained. Then suddenly reacted to financial pressure that the story barely explains. The consistency that once made him feel dangerous is gone, replaced by contradictory writing that seems more interested in moving pieces around than understanding who he is. It's like the show is reacting to audience perception of Nate rather than writing him as a coherent character. And yet, not every character completely falls apart. Maddie Perez and Lexi Howard actually benefit from some of the restructuring. Maddie's move towards a more independent, Hollywood-adjacent trajectory fits her personality in a way that feels earned. And Lexi's perspective as someone observing the chaos around her finally has space to breathe. For once, their arcs actually feel like they're growing towards something instead of being dragged through the plot noise. But then you got Jules Vaughn and the inconsistency returns. Her storyline swings between emotional vulnerability, self-destructive behavior without enough connective tissue in between. Her relationship dynamics lose impacts because the show rushes through consequences instead of letting them land. When she reconnects with Rue, it doesn't feel like resolution. It feels like the script is looping back because it ran out of direction. By the time it ends, her role in this story is a blur in a car window. You know it's bad when Cassie has more OnlyFans nonsense than Jules. Yes, it's that bad. She has no purpose at all in this show, and it's a perfect example as of how bad her character became. A major issue this season has is how it heavily leans on explicit content and OnlyFans style framing without integrating it into a meaningful narrative. A move so polarizing that even people who run OnlyFans called HBO and Sam Levinson out for the usage of it in the show. It's not just about present, it's about purpose. The show often presents these elements as if they are the story rather than being a part of it. Compare this to something like Margot's Got Money Troubles, and the difference is staggering. They both have similar subject matter, but the difference is Margot's Got Money Problems is grounded in character philosophy, relationships, and long-term emotional consequences rather than isolated shock sequences. Even the production chaos reinforces the disconnect. Now, I love Hans Zimmer. Who doesn't? But the score by Labrinth is the visual style, and Zimmer's style doesn't fit this world at all. No longer does it feel like they're building atmosphere, it feels like they're overcorrecting it, like they're compensating for narrative thinness. Same goes for Fezco, but this one is not really the show's fault. The death of Angus Cloud was a tragedy that no one can predict, so I can't blame this on anyone really. But I will say the flashback with him and Rue was a surprising touch I didn't expect. Sure, it's a little strange to see, especially given Levinson's comments, but it's a quiet moment that reminds you why he is the heart of the series. Anyway, by the time the season leans into its crime subplot involving figures like the painfully average Lori and the surprisingly interesting Alamo, the tonal shift is complete. The show that once focused on intimate emotional fallout is now trying to function as a crime-driven drama without the structure or clarity to support it. And that's the real tragedy here, because the final stretch briefly reminds you of what the series used to be capable of. There are isolated moments of emotional clarity, character history, and real stakes, grand performances, and a bittersweet ending. When the story slows down and stops chasing escalation, but those moments don't repair the season. They just highlight how inconsistent everything else has been. At its core, this season of Euphoria doesn't fail because it tries to evolve, it fails because it never commits to what it's evolving into. It shifts between trauma, crime story, and shock-driven spectacle without ever settling on a consistent identity. It tries so hard to be season 1 of Euphoria and The Sopranos at the same time, and it fails at both. And without that foundation, even the strongest performances and the best scenes ended up feeling like fragments of a much better version of this story that no longer exist. So I'm gonna give season 3 a 2 out of 10. And that is the Euphoria series. After years of waiting, everything I thought came true. I knew this was gonna happen. I've been saying this was gonna be shit for years now. And the best comparison I can make is actually Stranger Things. Now, I know that sounds insane, but I want you to hear me out for a moment. You know how a lot of people say Stranger Things should have ended after season 1? Well, that's basically Euphoria. Season 1 was a lightning in a bottle. It was stylish, raw, self-contained, and more importantly, it felt complete. But instead of leaving it there, HBO kept pushing it further and further, trying to recreate that same magic. And that's where everything started to fall apart. Euphoria didn't die because it was always bad, it died because it had nowhere left to go. Season 2 already felt like a warning sign. More shock value, more chaos, but less substance. While season 3 completely collapsed under its own weight. The writing got messy, the characters stopped feeling real, and the show became more interested in being extreme than actually telling a good story. At its best, Euphoria was a masterpiece about addiction, identity, and self-destruction. At its worst, it became everything wrong with modern streaming shows. Louder, emptier, and desperate to stay relevant. That's the real tragedy here. This show went from HBO's most unique series to something that was almost unwatchable. So, is there a future for Euphoria? Honestly, I think the best thing HBO can do is let it die. The story has already run its course. There's nowhere left to go, especially with Zendaya not returning. But let's be real, they won't do that. They'll wait a few years, reboot the hype, bring in new creatives, and try to force that season 1 magic all over again. Because that's what the streaming era does. It keeps franchises alive long after the story is over. And that's why Euphoria is so exhausting. You can literally watch the series lose itself in real time. Season 1? Incredible. Season 2, a mess. Season 3, the moment the show completely broke. It went from vibrant characters and emotional storytelling to pure shock value and character assassination. So once it ended, it barely felt like the same show anymore. The reactions became loud and the need to keep the show running was out of steam. And that is entirely deserved. I'm done. Peace out. I never want to watch this show again.